It's the 2022 World Cup. It's England's players.
Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at England's squad for the 2022 World Cup. This preamble is going to be the same for every mediacast we do for the Player Series, so those familiar with it can jump ahead a little more than 3 minutes to when we begin talking about the team. For YouTube watchers, there's actually a timestamp towards the bottom of the show notes that you can just click on and go directly to that point. For those looking for a quick version of this, you can skip to near the end of the mediacast, say the last 5 minutes or so, where we summarize the likely starters. Just prior to that, with about 15 minutes remaining, again, the timestamps will be there on YouTube. We'll have some discussion on the squad, talking about the main issues with the squad, how we see their overall strength, and how they look going into the Cup. So we'll put those times in the show notes, and we'll also be editing this mediacast into a shorter version for those who are just looking for an overview. For those looking for a deeper dive, you've come to the right place. We go through the players to explain why we place them in the categories that we use, and we give some information on their history and standing with the squad. So we do this by first organizing the players into their designated positions. And we always note that these are a bit artificial since players don't always play in their coded position. But it's nevertheless a good way to organize the discussion. And then we go through the players and share some of the data we've collected in our soccer files. And using that data, we try to predict how likely the player is to make the team. And that's based mostly on their recent participation. We categorize them into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seems to be off the squad. And we also mention any big players who have recently left the team, and we make note of any who are currently injured. We'll also try to determine at the end of the podcast who will be the starters and who will be more like substitutes. Right, so for those following on YouTube, we have a very simple graphic where we list the names, and you can see how the players' names are spelled. And this is the same broadcast for the audio version, the podcast. So we're going to try to repeat the names a few times to help listeners familiarize themselves so that when they step onto the field, you have a notion of who they are. And that's as much as we can do at this point. But as the rosters are being published, we will do an update episode, and that will essentially be going over our predictions for the players and then updating them based on any new information we have. For example, whether they participated in the games between now and then, and on the rosters, which will probably be released in early November. So keep your eye out for those, an update podcast both for the team and for the players, probably in early to mid-November. All right, let's move on to England then. And we will talk about takeaways from previous podcasts. So we did a team podcast on England for the 2020 Euro Cup, which was in 2021. And that was our first series, actually. And our takeaways from those podcasts really was about England and their problem with pressure. So generally, England is very strong in qualifying, but often when they get to the Cup, they don't perform as well as hoped for or as expected. In fact, sometimes, quite often, their games are quite dull. And we don't see the kind of performances that we see in the Premier League at their club level. And sometimes, especially in the past, they look like deer caught in headlights, kind of frozen on the pitch sometimes. So that seemed to be resolved through their 2020 Euro Cup performance especially. But there were signs of it in that Cup. some dull games or long periods of dull performance during the games, and it's still a concern. So we'll return to that at the end, but English fans, of course, will hope that that's more a thing of the past. Let's take a look at their formations. And basically, they favor three formations. So we'll take a look during the Euro Cup. Oops, my computer is misbehaving. Behave, computer. Okay, during the Euro Cup, we see they started with a 4-3-3 formation, but then they kind of leaned towards a 4-2-3-1 formation. So 4 defenders at the back. However, a couple of times they used three-man defense, and it was basically a 3-4-2-1 in that case. But they have used what you see for game 4 there, a 3-2-2-2-1. So that means the midfield is kind of divided into defensive and attacking midfielders, but otherwise very much like a 3-4-2-1. So they have gone with that a couple of times, but most of the time it is the 4-3-3 or the 4-2-3-1. And we see that actually continuing through their World Cup qualifying games, where it was either one or the other, a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, until the last 2 games, and these were a 3-2-2-2-1 again. So the most significant feature being that 3-man defense. Now, those games were against Albania and San Marino, so perhaps they were more comfortable with just with a more attacking side, basically. And since then, they've played 2 friendlies, one both at home, one against Switzerland and one against Ivory Coast. And they really did try out a few new players, especially in the first of those games. Some of the players who really hadn't seen much field time, but were often on the bench. So really that's not new players coming in, but maybe giving a little experience to those players. And to an extent, they did that in the Nations League games too. But there we see that 3-2-2-2-1 formation again in their first game against Hungary. But in the following games, they're more standard formations, the 4-2-3-1. Against Germany and Italy, and the 4-3-3 in game 4 against Hungary again. So they do tend to favor a 4-man backline, but use a 3-man backline, especially against no, I won't make any comments on when they use it, because it's not really a pattern. Okay, sorry, I put the wrong graphic there for Nations League and friendly. So there we go. So generally we expect a 4-man backline, sometimes a 3-man backline, and usually just the one attacker. And if it's not just the lone Harry Kane up there, then it's usually 3 attackers, 2 kind of wingers pushing up to right and left forward positions. All right, well, let's move on to the squad. And we begin with the manager, Gareth Southgate. And he has been the manager of England since 2016. So kind of a long-term manager. He took them to the 2018 World Cup and the 2022 Euro Cup, and he himself was a player. We won't go into too much detail, but he had 57 caps between 1995 and 2004, and just for reference, he played in the 1998 and 2002 World Cup. I suppose he's most famous for missing a penalty in a shootout. I believe that one was in 1998. Okay, well, that's a horrible thing to remember him by, but there we have it. Let's move on to goalkeepers, and we have a definite candidate in Jordan Pickford. and a likely candidate in Nick Pope, and a likely candidate in Aaron Ramsdale, and a possible candidate in Sam Johnson, and Fraser Forster seems to be off the squad, as does Dean Henderson. Now, I should say that those listening to the podcast may think, wow, this guy's out of date. So I do realize, as a Premier League watcher myself, that the form of these players will come into play. However, it hasn't really yet, because their last games were in June, and I'm going mostly on the international games they've played to that point. So we will kind of provide an update in November, which will take their more recent form into account. Okay, well, moving back to, and I'll make a few comments on what I know as we talk as well. Moving back to the beginning, we have Jordan Pickford. So he has started actually only 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 6 others. So he will, we're saying definitely, as in he will definitely make the squad. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll be the starter, and there is some discussion to be had about that. Nevertheless, I'll give the information on him. He's been with the team since 2017 and has 45 caps, and he is 28 years old. So he's been with Everton in England since 2017 and was with Sunderland for a long time before that, loaned out actually to a few teams while he was with Sunderland. And he was the starting keeper for his first tournament, which was the 2018 World Cup, and was also the starter in the Euro 2020, playing all games in both of those. All right, Nick Pope is a likely candidate. Just going to make the graphic a bit bigger for YouTube watchers. Nick Pope started 1 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, but he was on the bench for 8 of them. And only 4 games was he not called up for. So he's been with England since 2018 and has just 8 caps in that time. And he's 30 years old. So he recently moved to Newcastle in England, but he was with Burnley in England for a long time before that, and with Charlton prior to that. And he was on the roster for the 2018 World Cup. However, he wasn't on the roster for the 2020 the 2020 Euro Cup. Keep in mind that that was in the summer of 2021. However, given his recent form, I'd say likely is right. So even though he wasn't in the Euro Cup, it's likely that we'll see him on the squad here. The other likely candidate is Aaron Ramsdale. So he started 3, including the last 2 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 5 of those, so not selected for 5 matches. He has been with the team just since 2021. No, that I'd have to say 2020. Since he was on the squad. I don't think he got a cap in 2020, though. He now has 3 caps, and he is 24 years old. So he plays for Arsenal in England, and he was with Sheffield United before that, and Bournemouth prior to that. Aaron Ramsdale, a likely candidate. I didn't finish up. He was on the squad for Euro 2020, but he was on the bench. Sam Johnson is a possible candidate. He started 2 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 5. However, he wasn't selected for the last 6 matches. So given the competition ahead of him, it might be tough for him to get his spot back. Especially since he is not starting for his team, I believe. I'm not dead sure, but we'll talk about that. He has been with the England squad for since 2021, or also 2020, although his first cap was in 2021. And he has 3 caps and is 29 years old. And he's with Crystal Palace in England, just moved there this year, so since 2022, and he was with West Brom before that, and actually with Manchester United for a long time, although he was loaned out quite a bit from Manchester United. So as I say, I don't believe he's the starting keeper for Crystal Palace, and if that's the case, that will probably work against him as far as being named to the team again. So he was on the roster for the Euro 2020. He was on the bench, though, for all 7 games. Fraser Forster is possible but unlikely. I think I put them in the wrong place on the YouTube graphic there. So I'll fix that. He actually returned after a 4-year absence in March 2022, but he didn't start any of their games. He just returned to the bench for 2 matches. However, he wasn't selected for the last 4. So a brief appearance there, and he has been with the squad since 2013, but has only earned 6 caps in that time and is 34 years old now. So most will know him as being with Southampton in England for a long time, from 2014 to 2022, but he recently moved to Tottenham in England, which is a move up in terms of stature, but a move down in terms of not being a starter for Tottenham. Whereas he was a starter for Southampton, at least for several of those years. So he has a longer history with England. He was on the roster for the 2014 World Cup and 2016 Euro Cup, but he was on the bench for both of those. And then he wasn't selected for the 2018 World Cup or the 2020 Euro Cup. So a brief appearance earlier this year in March, but it doesn't seem to indicate that he's making his way back onto the squad. And finally, we have Dean Henderson as a possible but unlikely candidate. And he was also selected for the Euro Cup squad. He was on the roster, on the roster and then on the bench for game 1. But then he was withdrawn from the squad due to injury and replaced by Aaron Ramsdale there. So that was the last time he appeared for the national team, even on the bench. So it doesn't look like he is a viable candidate anymore. He's been with Manchester United since 2015, but he was loaned out and is currently on loan to Nottingham Forest, who are newly promoted to the Premier League. So perhaps if he does well with them, he'll be more of a consideration. He did do well with Sheffield United in England, who he was also loaned to from Man United. And he just actually has 1 cap for the national team and is 25 years old. So Dean Henderson, again, an outside possibility, but a possibility nonetheless. All right, so we'll just kind of summarize the goalies here, the situation with the goalies. So it's kind of Jordan Pickford all the way through Euro Cup and through qualifying. Johnson and Ramsdale did step in, but they tended to be for the easier games in qualifying. And Nick Pope was brought back in for one of the 2 friendlies. We saw that they after World Cup qualifying, played 2 friendlies and then 4 Nations League games. So Pope started one of those friendlies, but it doesn't mean much because they were kind of giving lesser used players a chance to play. In recent Nations League game, it was Pickford for the first 2 games and Ramsdale for the last 2. So that kind of pips Ramsdale, based on that information, perhaps a little bit ahead of Nick Pope, but as I said, we have to take into account the form since then, which we'll talk more about in our update podcast. Okay, well, moving on to defenders. We have a category for general or versatile defenders, and I actually could put Kieran Trippier there, but I'm gonna talk about him at the end as we lead into midfielders, because he plays both defense and midfielders. So we're going to start with central defenders. And just to give out the names, we have Harry Maguire as a likely candidate, and John Stones as a likely candidate, and Connor Cody as a likely candidate. Tyrone Mings as a possible candidate, Ben White as a possible, Mark Guihi as a possible, and Fikayo Tomori also as a possible. So those are all the candidates we have. And let's go back to the beginning with Harry Maguire. So Harry Maguire started 8 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1 other. So the only 2 games he missed were 2 games he was injured for. So Harry Maguire has been with the team since 2017 and has 46 caps and 7 goals, and he's 29 years old. He plays for Manchester United in England since 2019, and he played for Leicester in England from 2017 to 19, and for Hull before that. So his first tournament was the 2018 World Cup, where he was a starter, and he was on the bench for the first 2 games of Euro 2020, but he started. I'm not sure if he was injured for that, or I believe he was, but I can't actually remember. But he ended up being good in the tournament and named to the team of the tournament. So he's very good in the air, and that's why he has 7 goals for the team, usually coming up for corners. But I must say his recent form hasn't been that great. So I wonder if he'll have moved down in status a little bit coming in to the team selection there. But let's move on to John Stones, who we also consider a likely candidate. He started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. So there were 2 games that he was not called up for. And he has been with the team since 2014 and has 58 caps and 3 goals. He's 28 years old. And he plays for Manchester City in England since 2016 and was with Everton and Barnsley in England before that. So for the 2014 World Cup, he wasn't selected for the squad, but he was selected for a 7-man standby squad, but wasn't called up from that. In 2016, he was on the roster, but saw no action, even in a B-team game that they played there. But in 2018, he was a starter, started all 7 games, and actually got 2 of his 3 goals for the national team during that tournament. And in 2020, he was also a starter, started all 17 games. And yeah, so a likely candidate in John Stones. Although he does seem to have a bit of trouble getting onto the field for Manchester City. He recently scored a nice goal in the Champions League, which I'm sure will help him. So it doesn't seem like he's been injured, just difficulty getting onto that talented team. But perhaps that will help his cause, scoring a nice goal in the Champions League. Connor Cody, we have him as likely also because he started 5 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 8 others. So again, this likely means likely to be named to the squad, but it doesn't seem likely that he would be a starter there. He's been with the team just since 2020 and has 10 caps and 1 goal and is 29 years old. And he plays for Wolverhampton in England and has since 2015. However, he is currently on loan to Everton in England. So Connor Cody, a likely candidate. Next, we have Tyrone Mings. So we have 4 candidates who are at the possible level. And the first we'll talk about is Tyrone Mings. So he started 4 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup and was on the bench for 4. However, he wasn't selected for 5 others, including the last 4 matches. So I think he has gotten into some trouble. I know he had a bit of trouble with his coach or his manager at Aston Villa, so perhaps that's making him a bit less likely of a candidate. Anyway, he's been with the team since 2019 and has 17 caps and 2 goals and is 28 years old. And he plays for Aston Villa in England. The manager I'm talking about there is Steven Gerrard. Mings was with Bournemouth in England before that, from 2015 to 19. And he was a part of the Euro Cup squad. He started and finished games 1 and 2, but then was replaced by Harry Maguire, and otherwise appeared only as a substitute one time after that. Next candidate is Ben White. He started 2 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. Otherwise, he wasn't selected. And he has recently moved, no, not recently, and sorry, I should start with his national team history first. He's been on the team since 2021 and has 4 caps and 0 goals, and he is 25 years old. So I said he recently moved, but actually it was in 2021 that he moved to Arsenal, having played for Brighton for 5 years before that, although he was loaned out quite a bit by Brighton there. He was with Brighton's youth club also. And he was, to my surprise, called up for the 2020 Euro Cup squad. I don't remember him being called up. I thought he was a new player. But in fact, he was on the roster for 2020 and on the bench actually only for games 1 and 3. So he wasn't initially selected, but was called back in to replace Trent Alexander-Arnold, and actually hadn't played for England or even been called up prior to that, except for the warm-up games immediately before the tournament. So a bit of a surprise selection in 2020, and he didn't see any action, which is why, in my mind, he seemed like a new player to the squad. But he has started 2 games, so is a possibility. Mark Guéhi is also possible. He earned his first cap in March of this year, in 2022, and started 2 of their remaining 6 games. And he subbed in for 1 and was on the bench for 2. So there was only 1 of the last 6 games that he wasn't called up for. So again, he earned his first cap this year, but now has 3 caps and is 22 years old. And he plays for Crystal Palace in England. And he was with Chelsea in England from 2019 to 2021 and was loaned out to Swansea by Chelsea until he moved to Crystal Palace. And possibly the most likely of the possible candidates, so I'm going to move him up on the list here, is Fikayo Tomori. Now, he doesn't play in the English league, so for some he'll be a bit of a shrouded player, a player shrouded in mystery. He plays for AC Milan in Italy, but I'll get to that. I'll talk about his recent participation first. He started 1, and it was the second last of their games since the Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1. So he has. He did actually have 1 cap in 2019 also. So he's been with the team since 2019 and has 3 caps and is 25 years old. Okay, so it looks like kind of his recent participation is like a recall to the team. And he, as I said, is with AC Milan since 2021 and is doing quite well with them. And he was with Chelsea in England from 2016 to 21, but mostly loaned out. So he was loaned out to AC Milan before he moved there, and loaned out to Derby and Hull also. So he could be a player kind of coming into the picture. And when I look at the possible candidates here, I almost think he would be top of the list there. Okay, so let's take a look or kind of a little summary of central defenders in terms of what's been happening since the Euro Cup. And basically, we have Maguire and Stones through the Euro Cup, although, as we saw, Mings started the first two games, but was basically replacing Maguire there. And when they had a three-man defense, we saw in two games they had a three-man defense. It was the right back, Walker, who came in and played as a right central defender. Cody and Connor Cody and Tyrone Mings played some of the easier games in World Cup qualifying, but for the most part, it was still Maguire and Stones all through qualifying as the main men. And Guihi and White were used in one of the friendlies, so again, giving them some field time. And Guihi played also in the last Nations League game there, so perhaps making inroads onto the squad there. Okay, we move on to left backs, and we have actually just a possible candidate there in Luke Shaw, and another possible candidate in Ben Chilwell, and then a possible but unlikely candidate in Tyrick Mitchell. But I must say another candidate in this position is Kieran Trippier, who is coded as a right winger, but actually kind of plays all over the place. So I'll talk about him, but he almost seems the most likely candidate for this position now. But we'll go through the players. Luke Shaw started 4 of the 13 games since the Euro Cup and was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, but not selected for 7 others, including the last 4 matches. So he has been with the team since 2014, and he has 21 caps and 2 goals, and is 27 years old. He plays for Manchester United in England, and that's since 2014. He was with Southampton before that. And he did make the squad for the 2014 World Cup. He was a substitute there, but he did start game 3, which was they fielded a B team for that game. However, he didn't make the squad for the 2016 Euro Cup or the 2018 Gold Cup. However, he returned in 2020, and he was on the bench for the first game there, but gained a starting position for all remaining games there. So maybe that's why I have him at the top of the list here, because he was the starter in 2022. But given that he seems to be drifting off the squad here, as well as with his club, he's getting fewer starts. I wonder if Ben Chilwell or Kieran Trippier are more likely candidates. Okay, so that's Luke Shaw, and now Ben Chilwell. He started only 2 of their 19 games since the Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, injured for 2 and not selected for 7 others, like Ben Chilwell, including the last 4 matches. So he's been with England since 2018, and he has 17 caps and 1 goal, and is 26 years old. So he plays for Chelsea in England since 2020, and was with Leicester in England from 2015 to 2020. So he was his first tournament was in the Euro Cup 2020, but he was on the roster and saw no action there. And in terms of his club play, I know he has come back from not playing many games last year and is basically trying to re-earn his position back as the starter on his Chelsea squad. And obviously he'll be trying to do the same thing with England. He put in a good bid with a really nice play in a recent game. I don't know whether he got the final goal, but he he did wonders in setting up the goal. So kind of as soon as he got a chance to return, he did really well. So, if he shows that form, he might earn his spot back both on Chelsea and on the national team. So yeah, it actually looks like Shaw and Chilwell were kind of drifting off the team coming up to the summer of 2022. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But when we get to Kieran Trippier, we'll see that he's been starting there, and actually several other players, which I'll mention soon. Tyrick Mitchell is the other player coded as a left back, and we have him as possible but not likely. He got his first cap in March 22 and started one of their remaining 6 games and was subbed in for one other, but not selected for 4 matches. So he's also with Crystal Palace in England and earned his first caps this year. So he has 2 caps. And a very young player, 23 years old. Oh, okay, well, not so young, but he has been with Crystal Palace. He was with their youth club as well, so that's the only club he's played for. Okay, so we'll summarize with a little discussion about how it's gone. And actually, the left back period is quite undecided. So in the Euro tournament, Trippier started, but we saw that Shaw was actually the player really designated for that position. So he took over the position from game 2. And when it was a 3-man defense, he moved up to a midfield winger position. Since the World Cup, it was kind of shared amongst Shaw, Chilwell, and Trippier. And in the friendlies, it was Shaw and Mitchell. However, Shaw wasn't there for the Nations League games, so Trippier started twice, and James Justin started once, and Reece James, a left back, moved over to start one of the games. So the position kind of seems to be in a bit of flux right now, with the 2 main candidates, Sean and Chilwell, not being there for the last 4 games. So we'll see if they're able to resume that position. But again, even with that, since after the World Cup, it's kind of been in flux as to who is in that position. All right, moving over to the right backs, we have James Reese as a definite to make the squad, and we have Kyle Walker as a likely, and Trent Alexander-Arnold as likely, James Justin as a possible but unlikely, and Kyle Walker-Peters in the same category, possible but unlikely. So we'll go back to the top. We're starting with Reece James as a definite candidate because he started 4, including the last 2 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3 and not selected for 4 others. But I did take into account his kind of recent improvement in stature with the club. So I think it would be very surprising if he wasn't with the squad. So not necessarily supported by that participation record, but I gotta say I'm being a bit subjective there, and really should put him as a likely given that. But I'll keep him where he is for now. Reece James has been with the team since 2020, and he has 13 caps. And is 23 years old, and he plays for Chelsea in England, and was with the Chelsea Youth Club actually for 12 years. His first tournament was Euro 2020, but he only appeared in game 2, which he started and finished, but otherwise didn't make an appearance. So as I say, he's kind of grown in reputation since then, and I have him as a definite here. Ironically, I have Kyle Walker as a likely, And I say ironically because he seems to be the starter, whereas Reece James doesn't. But we'll talk about that soon. Kyle Walker started 7 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 4 of those and not selected for just 2 games. So Kyle Walker has been with England since 2011 and has 65 caps and is 32 years old, so one of the veterans on the team. He's been with Manchester City since 2017, but was with Tottenham before that, actually, for quite a while, for 8 years, although he was loaned out quite a bit there. Well, to 3 teams at least. And his first tournament, despite starting in 2011 with the national team, his first tournament was in 2016, where he was a starter. And he also started in 2018. He started all the games except games 3 and 7, which were both kind of B team games there. And in the Euro 2020, he was still the starter. He just missed 1 game where he wasn't even on the bench, but otherwise started all the games. And that's it for Kyle Walker. So we'll kind of come back during our discussion of the position there. Trent Alexander-Arnold is well known as the Liverpool right back. And he started just 3 of their 19 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 3, but he was out with 2 separate injuries for 4 games and then not selected for the last 2 matches. So he's been with England since 2018 and has 17 caps and 1 goal and is 24 years old. And as I mentioned, he's been with Liverpool in England for his whole career, since 2016 on the senior squad and with the Liverpool Youth Club from 6 years of age. So in terms of tournaments, he was called up for the 2018 World Cup, but he only appeared in game 3, which was one of the B team games. And he was not, he was selected actually for the 2020 Euro Cup, but he got injured before the tournament and, as we saw, was replaced by Ben White. James Justin and Kyle Walker-Peters are just possible but unlikely. So James Justin earned his first cap in June 2022, and he started 1 of their 4 games there, but he wasn't selected for the 3 others. So he plays for Leicester in England and has just that 1 cap and is 24 years old. Kyle Walker-Peters is 25 years old, and he got his first cap in March 2022 and started 1 of their remaining games and was subbed in for 1, but he wasn't selected for the last 4 matches. He has 5 caps, all in 2022, and plays for Southampton in England, and he was with Tottenham in England before that. Okay, let's summarize then with a little discussion of the position. So a few good candidates for this position. And so basically it seems like Southgate prefers a more defensive-minded right back to a more attacking right back, and so has favored Kyle Walker over Trent Alexander-Arnold. To the surprise of some people, because in some ways Trent Alexander-Arnold is a big name who is being left on the bench, but I think that's the reason. So Trent Alexander-Arnold, when he has played as a right winger twice and as a right midfielder once. So it seems like Southgate uses him just in a more attacking position, but for the right back position uses the more defensive Walker. Now, it could be that Reece James offers the best of both worlds, because he's a bit better defender than Alexander-Arnold seems to be, and he also has the attacking potential. So it was Walker mostly in the Euro Cup. And Trippier actually played right wing. That was when Walker moved back into central defence for the three-man central defence. It was Trippier kind of playing the wing. And about half the time it was Walker in World Cup qualifying, with Reece James kind of making inroads into the team during that period. Alexander-Arnold and Trippier, again, both appeared in the position in World Cup qualifying. And even as far as the Nations League games, it was still Kyle Walker, with Reece James getting in once. So it still seems like Kyle Walker, again, I should probably either move him up to definite or move James down to likely. But it seems like Kyle Walker is still the starter there. Okay, well, we'll finish with that general defender, and I'm going to call it general defender midfielder. He's a bit hard to peg, but we do have Kieran Trippier as a likely candidate to make the squad. So Kieran Trippier started 4 of the 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 5, but then he was out with 2 separate injuries for 4 others. So he was called up when he was fit. He's been with England since 2017 and has 37 caps and 1 goal, and is 32 years old now. And he has recently come back to Newcastle since 2022, having been with Atletico Madrid in Spain from 2019 to 2022. Prior to that, he was with Tottenham for 4 years, and with Burnley and Manchester City before that. His first tournament was the 2018 World Cup, where he started and finished all 7 games, and there he kind of lined up as a right midfielder, or a winger in all of his starts. And for Euro 2020, as we saw, he started game 1 as a left back, and but then was replaced by Luke Shaw, and he appeared again only in game 4. He started game 4 and appeared as a substitute in games 6 and 7. So came into the final as a substitute 71 minutes in. So Kieran Trippier, a likely candidate, although a little more difficult to say where he is, given that there seems to be a bit of a hole in left back. It's quite possible he'll play there, but he's lined up kind of as a right back and as a right. Did he line up? As a right back and a right winger, and a left back and a left winger. So hard to say where he's going to end up. That brings us to the end of defenders, and we'll move on to midfielders. We start with defensive midfielders, and we have 2 likely candidates in that category, and that is Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. So I'll start with Declan Rice. He started 7 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, subbed in for 1 and was on the bench for 3, so not selected for 2 matches there. And he's been with England since 2019 and has amassed 32 caps and 2 goals in that time. He's still just 23 years old, so quite young. He was actually with Ireland in 2018, and he played 3 games for them, but I'm guessing they were all friendlies, otherwise he would have been tied to them. But eventually threw his lot in with England, to the sadness of Irish fans, me being one of them, because my parents were from Ireland. And he's with West Ham in England since 2015, and he was with West Ham's youth club and Chelsea's youth club. Actually, Chelsea's youth club for most of his youth, just West Ham in the last year before professionalizing. He was born in England, though. And his first tournament was the 2020 Euro Cup, where he started all 7 games in the center of the midfield there. And Declan Rice, a likely candidate. Calvin Phillips, also likely. He started 5 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1, but wasn't selected for 4 matches, so not called up for 4. Calvin Phillips has been with England since 2020, but has 23 caps in that time and is 27 years old. So a bit of a late starter with England there. He recently moved to Manchester City in England since 2022, but was with Leeds in England for a long time before that, 2014 to 2022, and with Leeds Youth Club before that. So he was a starter also in the Euro Cup, started all 7 games there. And he was very solid in the midfield along with Declan Rice there. So those 2 are looking good. Defensive midfielders, though, sometimes blend into central midfielders. So we'll talk about central midfielders first and then kind of do a review of both. Oops, I've kind of made a mistake in the graphics there. So I'm just fixing that up for our YouTube listeners. Whoop, there we go. And central midfielders, we have 3 likely candidates and 2 possibles. So Jude Bellingham is a likely candidate. Phil Foden is classified as a central midfielder, although I see him more as more of an attacking midfielder or a winger, but he's here. We'll talk about him here. And James Ward-Prowse, one of the only players we're talking about today who has never been in a tournament. And as possible candidates, we have Jordan Henderson and Conor Gallagher. All right, so let's go back to the top, and we'll begin with Jude Bellingham, who started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro or the 2020 Euro Cup, really in 2021, and he subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 3, so just 2 matches that he was not called up for. And he's been with the national squad since 2020 and has 15 caps, and he's one of the youngest players at 19 years old. And he plays for Borussia Dortmund in Germany since 2020. He's been doing very well with them here in September, and was with Birmingham in England in 2019 and 20, and Birmingham's youth club. So rise in stature for Jude Bellingham. He was with the squad in the 2020 Euro Cup. Just as a sub there, he came in for 3 games. And so Jude Bellingham, a likely candidate. There's actually no order to these candidates, and it's really alphabetical order. So probably slightly more entrenched in the team is Phil Foden. He has started 5 of their 19 games since the Euro Cup, subbed in for 2. He was actually injured for the first 3, and then there were 3 games he wasn't called up for. And he has been with the team since 2020 and has 16 caps and 2 goals, and is also very young at 22 years old. But he's been with Manchester City since 2016 and was with Manchester's youth club from 9 years old. So he also was part of the Euro 2020 squad. In fact, he started games 1 and 2. And then honestly, to my surprise, because I thought he was playing well, he lost his starting position and only came in for 1 game after that. He lost his starting position to Bukayo Saka, who we'll talk about a bit later. So Phil Foden, a likely candidate, and James Ward-Prowse started 3 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and was on the bench for 5, and not selected for 5 others. So I wonder if I should have him as a possible candidate rather than as a likely one. In fact, I'm going to do that right here. And he's been with the national team since 2017 and has 11 caps and 2 goals for them. He's 28 years old, and he plays for Southampton in England for his whole career. since 2011, was with Southampton's youth club, also from 9 years of age. So he wasn't, though, part of the World Cup squad. Again, his first cap was in 2017, so he wasn't part of the World Cup squad in 2018, nor was he part of the Euro Cup squad in 2021. He had returned actually after a 2-year absence from the squad in March 2021. But he was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut there. All right. Well, so I'm going to move Ward-Prowse down to possible, and also at possible is Jordan Henderson, who has been captain of the team, I do believe, at times. He started 2 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 7 and on the bench for 5. However, he was not selected for 5 games, including the last 4. So otherwise, he might have been a likely candidate, but seems to have lost a bit of ground there. So he has been with England since 2010, so one of the veterans, 69 caps and 2 goals, and he's 32 years old. He plays for Liverpool in England and has done so since 2011, and was with Sunderland for 3 years before that. His first tournament was in 2012, where he was subbed in. He actually wasn't originally selected for the roster, but he was on a 5-man standby squad and then later called back in. And I think it was to replace Frank Lampard, who was out with a thigh injury. In the 2014 World Cup, he was a starter, but only a substitute in Euro 2016. And he was, also a starter in the 2018 World Cup, but a sub in the 2020 Euro Cup. So it seems like he's a starter in World Cups and a sub in Euro Cups. I hadn't noticed that pattern before. So a possible candidate, as I said, he didn't appear in any of the last 4 matches, but still on the menu here. Finally, a new player, Conor Gallagher. He got his first cap in November 2021, and he started 2 of their remaining 7 games and subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 3 others. So at least in the early part of 2022, he has been a staple ever since he came in, and he has 4 caps then since 2021 and is young at 22 years old. So he plays for Chelsea in England since 2019, although he made probably a bigger impression when he played on loan to Crystal Palace in 2021 and 22. So Conor Gallagher may be an up-and-comer for this World Cup. All right, well, we're going to review central and defensive midfielders in one breath. And the story is basically that in a 4-3-3, it's usually Rice in the center of the field, and in a 4-2-1-3, it's Rice and Phillips. So that was the case in Euro and World Cup qualifying. But Henderson sometimes did get in there during World Cup qualifying. And interestingly, Jude Bellingham was also used twice as a defensive midfielder, and Ward-Prowse once. So that would be in the 4-2-3-1 formation, Bellingham appearing twice and Ward-Prowse once. But generally, the more defensive midfielders are kind of in the center of the pitch, and the others will tend to play more on the outside or in a more attacking role. Okay, let's move on to left midfielders, and in fact we only have one player coded as a left midfielder, and that is Jesse Lingard. But Jesse Lingard we view as seemingly off the squad. So Jesse Lingard started 2 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, was subbed in once and on the bench once, but he wasn't selected for the last 9 matches. So none of the games in 2022 was he selected for. He recently moved, no, sorry, he's been with the team since 2016, but kind of on and off there. And he has 32 caps and 6 goals and is 30 years old now. Recently moved to Nottingham Forest, who were promoted to the top level of English soccer. So that's just this year. And was with Manchester United for 11 years, from 2011 to 22, although he was loaned out to several clubs, including West Ham, where he was very successful in 2021. Despite being with the team since 2016, he got his first tournament in 2018, so he wasn't part of the Euro 2016 squad, but he started all games except those B team games in the World Cup 2018. However, he wasn't selected for the 2020 Euro Cup squad. He did make the preliminary squad, but wasn't selected, didn't make the final cut there. That was mildly surprising given his good form in the league going into that cup. But ever since moving back to Manchester United, he kind of drifted out of the picture. We'll see how his form is with Nottingham Forest in terms of making a bid to get back to the team. But, you know, England often goes with a 4-3-3, which requires a left midfielder. In a 4-2-3-1, it's more of a left winger, and we do have some players in that position. But because we have no players in the left midfielder role, it is generally Mason Mount or Jude Bellingham who play that position in the 4-3-3. And similarly, we are very short of right midfielders. In fact, we have none. So again, it's got to be players playing slightly out of position to fill the role. And this one is a little less decided, as we saw with left midfielders, generally Mount or Bellingham. But on the right, it's just being filled by a whole bunch of players. So when it's not a 4-2-3-1, Phillips sometimes plays as the left midfielder. And that was pretty much the case in the Euro Cup. But it's been a variety of players otherwise, with Foden, Ward-Prowse. Lingard did play 1 game, maybe 2 games in that position. Henderson and Gallagher all filling that right midfield position when they've played a 4-3-3. Again, they don't always play a 4-3-3, so we don't know how much they're going to use it during the World Cup. All right, we move on to left wingers then. And we start with Raheem Sterling, who is a definite candidate, and Jack Grealish, who is a likely candidate, and Jadon Sancho, who is a possible candidate. So going back to Raheem Sterling, he's certainly one of the stars, one of the biggest stars on the English team. And however, he only started 7 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3. And it was only 1 game that he wasn't called up for. So he's been with England since 2012 and has 77 caps and 19 goals, and is 28 years old. He recently moved to Chelsea in England and was with Manchester City for a long time before that, from 2015 to 22, and with Liverpool before that. He was actually born in Jamaica, and yeah, that's all I have to say about that. But it is interesting how many of England's attackers have Jamaican connections, which we'll talk about when we get to the end. 2014 World Cup was his first tournament, and he started all 3 games there. In 2016, he was also a starter, and in the 2018 World Cup, and 2020 Euro Cup was a starter in all of those. He didn't score any goals in the 2018 World Cup, but he scored 3 of their 11 goals in the Euro Cup and was named to the team of the tournament there, having also scored quite a few goals in qualifying. Okay, so a definite candidate for England there. And we move on to Jack Grealish, who is a likely candidate. And he started 5 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup and was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 1. So just 1 game he wasn't selected for during that time. And he's been with England since 2020, but has earned 23 caps and 1 goal in that time. So Jack Grealish is 27 years old, and he moved to Manchester City in England in 2020, and he had been with Aston Villa in England for a long time before that, since 2012. He was also with their youth club from 6 years old, and even that wasn't the first youth club he played for. His first tournament was the Euro 2020, and he was basically a sub in that, although he started game 3 there. The fans are very excited about him getting onto the field, and he did actually play well in game 4 against Germany, where he was subbed in 69 minutes in. Okay, and finally we have Jadon Sancho, and he started just 1 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 1 other, but not selected for 11 of the matches. And so we'll see how he does. He's been with England since 2018, actually, and has 23 caps and 3 goals. So he's just 22 years old. And he currently plays for Manchester United in England since 2021. And he was with Borussia Dortmund, one of the few English players who played abroad. Borussia Dortmund for 4 years, from 2017 to 21, and was with Manchester City's youth club before making that move. So he was part of the Euro 2020 squad, but he was basically a sub, although he did start and finish game 5, which I think was against the Ukraine. He is one of the players who was selected for taking a shootout in the final against Italy, and England was kind of criticized for having inexperienced players take the penalty. His was unfortunately particularly poorly taken. But there we have it, Jadon Sancho as a possible candidate here. And again, much has to do with their club form in the lead up to the Cup. So the left winger position, as in summary of the left wingers, this can range from a left attacking midfielder to a left forward position. If you think about the 4-3-3, it would be a left forward. And if you think about the 4-2-3-1, it would be a left attacking midfielder there. So they're quite often used. And sometimes there can be 2 left wingers, kind of a left forward together with a left back moving up to the midfield if they go with a 3-man defense. So, but that's usually a kind of a left back in that case. So, Sterling usually occupies the left forward or the left attacking position, and Mount has been in that position once in the Euro Cup. Recently, Sterling has moved to the right side quite often. So Jack Grealish has been used there in World Cup qualifying, and Jadon Sancho and Smith Rowe, who we'll be talking about later, each getting a turn in that position. Actually, even Bukayo Saka, who's usually on the right, did take a turn on the left. So a fairly fluid position, but we can think of Raheem Sterling usually there, although, as I say, sometimes he's moving over to the right now. And speaking of right, we move on to right wingers, and we have Bukayo Saka as a likely candidate and Jared Bowen as a possible candidate. But I have talked about Phil Foden, who I also consider kind of a right winger here, but we've talked about him, so here we'll focus on Bukayo Saka, who started 5 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup and was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. So just 2 games that he wasn't called up for. And he's been with the team since 2020 and has 18 caps and 4 goals. And he's 21 years old. So he is with Arsenal in England since 2018 and was with Arsenal's youth club before that. So like so many, his first tournament was in the 2020 Euro Cup, where he wasn't a starter, but as I said, Phil Foden started the first 2 games, and then he kind of moved into the position, starting games 3, 4, and 6. And he was also, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm focusing on the negative, because he actually played well in the Cup, but he was one of the players selected to take a penalty against Italy in the final, and he also missed his shot. So, again, questions as to why such inexperienced players were taking those penalties. Jared Bowen is got his first cap in June 2022, and then he started two of the remaining 4 games and subbed in for the 2 others. He had a very good season prior to June 2022, so that season beforehand. However, he's not starting off as hot this season, so it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, he kind of was selected for the squad based on form, so it would seem that he would need to keep up that form to remain on the squad. Nevertheless, he has 4 caps since 2022 and is 26 years old, and he plays for West Ham in England since 2020. He was with Hull in England before that. So Jared Bowen, a possible candidate, and let's do a little summary of the right winger position before we move on. So just as I said with the left wing position, this can range from being a right attacking midfielder to a right forward, and again, there could be a defender coming up to play as a winger, which would push this position into a right forward position. So we said Phil Foden started in this position in the Euro Cup, but Bukayo Saka took over, and Jadon Sancho and Raheem Sterling each moved over from the right wing to play the left wing position once, and Sterling did increasingly so over the World Cup qualifiers. But otherwise, if it wasn't Sterling, it was Saka and Foden in the position, and that continued into friendlies, with Foden making a few appearances there in the Nations League games. All right, well, now we move on to forwards. I include attacking midfielders as part of the forward discussion. So for attacking midfielders, we have 2 candidates, a likely candidate in Mason Mount and a possible candidate in Emile Smith-Rowe. So Mason Mount started 7 of their 19 games since the Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1, and wasn't called up for 2 of the games. And he's been with England since 2019 and has 31 caps and 4 goals. So he's 23 years old, and he's played for Chelsea in England since 2017. But he was loaned out a couple of times, once to Derby and once to Vitesse in the Netherlands. So he was with the Chelsea Youth Club also. He was selected for the Euro 2020 squad, and he started 5 of their 7 games there, and generally was a central attacking midfielder in the Euro Cup, but became moved over to a left attacking midfielder in the final there. Yeah, so a likely candidate, Mason Mount. Emile Smith-Rowe got his first cap in November 2021, and he started one of their remaining 8 games and subbed in for 2 others. However, he wasn't selected for 5 of the matches, including the last 4, those Nations League games. So he has been with England since 2021 and has 3 caps and 1 goal and is 22 years old. He plays for Arsenal in England and has done so since 2018, but he was loaned to Huddersfield in 2020 and to Leipzig in Germany, RB Leipzig, in 2019. But he was with the Arsenal youth setup from 10 years of age. Okay, so the attacking midfielder role, in summary of this section, is not often used, and I could include secondary strikers in that, and we don't have any players labelled as secondary strikers for England. But yeah, if you think about it, it's not used often, really only in a 4-2-3-1 formation. So when they do use that setup, it's almost always Mount. In that case, Grealish took the spot one time in the Euro Cup, but otherwise it's Mason Mount. But Mount also does play on the left sometimes as a left attacker. Okay, moving on to forwards, we have a definite candidate in Harry Kane, probably their most famous player there. And we have likely candidates with, not likely, possible, with Tammy Abraham and Ollie Watkins. And then seemingly off the squad is Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Marcus Rashford, and Danny Welbeck. And a couple of others too, Callum Wilson and Patrick Bamford, all of those seemingly off the squad. But with a chance to get back on, which is why we included them in this list. Generally, it means that they've appeared since 2020, the players who we have as seemingly off the squad. Okay, well, Harry Kane is their captain, and if Jordan Henderson has been captain, I think it's only in the absence of Harry Kane. He started 9 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup and was subbed in for 3 of those and on the bench for the others. So he's always there. And even when he's not a starter, that would usually be against weaker teams where they give someone else a bit of game time. So Harry Kane, captain of England, he's been with them since 2015 and has 73 caps and an astounding 50 goals in that time. And he's still just 29 years old, so has a bit of a few years left in him there. And he's been with Tottenham in England since 2009. One might forget that he wasn't always a top player for Tottenham. He was loaned out to Leicester and Norwich and Millwall and Leyton Orient. He was loaned out quite a bit in his early years. So kind of came into his star form a bit later. He was called up for the 2016 Euro Cup, so that would be around the time he started making a name for himself. Where he started all 4 games but didn't score any goals. He was also a starter in the 2018 World Cup, and there he scored 6 of their 12 goals, and won the Golden Boot Award actually for the top scorer of the tournament, as well as being named to the team of the tournament. In 2020, he started all 7 games and scored 4 of their 11 goals there, and has done really well for England. So they'd be definitely at a loss without him. Even in qualifying for this tournament, he got 12 of their 39 goals there. So was the not only the top scorer for England, but the co-top scorer for European qualifying in World Cup qualification. So Harry Kane, of course, a definite candidate, barring any injury is the only thing that would keep him out. Or possible candidate Tammy Abraham actually returned after an 11-month absence in October 2021. So that absence kept him out of the Euro Cup. And he started one of their remaining 6 games and was subbed in for 3 others. So seems to be kind of coming back into the team. And his recent form is a further argument in that direction. He's been with England since 2017, but in that time only has 11 caps and 3 goals. Again, hard to displace Harry Kane. And as we saw, England really only uses one centre forward. Tammy Abraham is 25 years old now, and he plays for Roma in Italy, who he's been doing very well with recently. And he was with Chelsea before that, so from 2016 to 21. He had periods where he did well there too, but he was loaned out to Aston Villa and Swansea and Bristol City during that period. But he was with the Chelsea Youth Club for from 7 years old. So as I said, he didn't make Euro 2020. He didn't make the World Cup 2018. Again, his first cap was in 2017, but not selected for either World Cup 2018 or 2020. So has yet to play in a tournament. Also possible, Ollie Watkins. He started one of their 13 games since the Euro Cup and was on the bench for 3 of them, but actually not selected for 9 matches, including the last 4. So I suspect things will come down to form for him too, and the form is not outstanding so far this season. He got his first cap in 2021 and has 7 caps and 2 goals, and is 27 years old. He plays for Aston Villa in England, which he has since 2020, and he played for Brentford before that. So he goes by Ollie or by Oliver. I've heard announcers using both, so a possible candidate in Ollie Watkins. Dominic Calvert-Lewin has not appeared for the national team since the Euro Cup. He was selected for it, which I'll get to soon. He got his first cap in 2020, and in all 11 caps and 4 goals. So he hasn't done badly for the national team with 4 goals in 11 games. And he is 25 years old. He plays for Everton in England and has done so since 2016, and was with Sheffield United before that, and actually with Sheffield United Youth Club for a long time. So he did make the 2020 Euro Cup. He was subbed into 2 games there, but he didn't get any goals in the tournament. And since then, he's been struggling a lot with injury and really hasn't made much of an impression. So if it does come down to form, which it often does, he would really have to have a good few weeks in October, late September and October, to make it back onto the squad. However, someone who may be doing that is Marcus Rashford. So he last appeared for the team in the 2020 Euro Cup, hasn't played any of the 19 games since then. He got his start in 2016 and has 46 caps and 12 goals. So he's done well scoring goals too. And is 25 years old. So he's with Manchester United and has been for his whole career. He started with the senior team in 2015 and was with the youth team from 2005. So Marcus Rashford was selected for the 2016 World Cup, but only came in for a couple of games as a sub there. And in the 2018 World Cup, same thing. He just started a B team game there and otherwise subbed into several games. In Euro 2020, he was also a substitute. In both the Euro and World Cups, he came in for most of the games. And he's another player who was selected to take a penalty against Italy, and he missed his shot also. So Marcus Rashford, not on the team since 2021, but his form has been good this year. And given their kind of lack of replacements for Harry Kane, I think he does have a chance of making it back onto the squad. So next we have Danny Welbeck. Danny Welbeck, I won't say as much about him because he seems less likely of a candidate. I'm almost tempted to move Marcus Rashford up to possible, but it's not supported by his record, so I tend to be as objective as possible. Danny Welbeck was with the team from 2011 to 2018, but hasn't appeared since 2018. So I'll give more detail if he makes it back into the picture. He's actually been looking quite good this season, but I think it's a long way back to the national team for him. Callum Wilson last appeared for the team in November 2019, so he didn't make the Euro Cup squad. He's plays for Newcastle in England, but is currently injured, so that won't give him a chance to show much, or won't give him much time to show form. I think he will return from injury before the Cup, but he would really have to make an impression. And Patrick Bamford similarly has been injured for a long time. He's just coming back now, and he was selected basically based on his form in around 2021, but he's only earned one cap. He plays for Leeds in England, but again, he'd have to show spectacular form to make it back onto the team. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the team, but we're gonna no, hang on. I'm gonna just summarize the position of forward. Well, not much to say. It's always Harry Kane, and Abraham has come in twice, and Watkins once, and Bamford once, but those tend to be against weaker teams. So really, it's just Harry Kane, and they probably just gave those starts to other players just to give them a bit of practice. So discussion of the squad. Let's start by reviewing what we said at the beginning, the takeaways from the previous podcast. So we talked a bit about pressure and performance, and not a lot to add to that here. Actually, it's never been an issue in qualifying. They look like a very strong and confident team. But as I said, there were hints of it in the Euro Cup and in the World Cup at times, although they seem to generally overcome those problems. The hints came from being sometimes dull in their play and a bit at a loss of what to do. And then in the penalty shootout, they also seemed, a bit overwhelmed. So that was certainly a problem before the 2014, before the 2018 World Cup, sorry. But as I say, it can sometimes be an issue. Sometimes an issue against teams that they're strongly expected to beat. So I've always myself felt it was a reaction to pressure. There's such heavy expectation upon them by the English media and fans that I think they just kind of froze sometimes and couldn't get their game into action. And as I said, sometimes it was particularly pronounced against teams that they were expected to beat, like Iceland and Hungary in recent games with Hungary. So if that's true, it could be an issue here against USA and Iran. It doesn't really seem to happen against Scotland and Wales that much, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Otherwise, England has a very stable group of players, and they really haven't changed much. Of course, a lot of the players were new for the Euro 2020 squad, but they kind of brought them in quite comfortably, and they really haven't tried out that many new players, and they haven't gotten rid of a lot of players either. So I think that will work in their favor, in that the players have been playing together more and more over the last few years, and are probably getting used to each other. One of the advantages of not kind of rotating a whole lot of players. Okay, well, if we talk about their club affiliations, of course, they're with many of the top clubs in England, but they've always been criticised for not really branching outside of England very much, so they're a bit insular there. But we have all the top clubs represented: Manchester City, Man United, Tottenham, Chelsea, Arsenal, and Liverpool. And then from some of the smaller clubs, although most of them come from those clubs, but we do have representation from Everton and Crystal Palace. I think each of those have 2 players, and Southampton, West Ham, like that. However, we do have a few players playing abroad there. So we have Jude Bellingham playing with Borussia Dortmund, and we saw that Jadon Sancho came back from abroad there. And we have Tammy Abraham playing with Roma, and Fikayo Tomori playing with Milan. All of them doing quite well with those teams. So they may be out of the kind of the consciousness, the weekly consciousness of English fans, but they're definitely candidates on this squad based on their play with those teams. Now, if you've listened to other podcasts, you'll see I'm kind of trying to put together a bit of a statistical analysis here. So we'll see how it's going. And one of the things I consider is how many players they've called up since 2020, the total number of players. So so far we've seen that especially Ghana and USA particularly have called up so many players that they have a bit of a rotation problem or selection problem. So they have close to 70, which seems to be a confusing number. The average is 52, and England has 45. So, as I said before, not calling in every player who has a good bit of form. It's kind of hard to get onto the England team, and you have to have a bit of sustained form to do it. And that's good, because that gives a chance for the players who are selected to play together more often. Well, I'm going to move next to talk about the total players that are definite and likely. And for England, that's 21 players. So let me see how that compares to other teams. This sometimes gives an indication of how tight the team is, because players or teams with a low number here tend to have players who are playing together on the field more often, so it makes the team tighter. If there's a huge number of players here, it means they're switching in and out quite a bit. So the players are kind of always playing with a different group of players. So 21 is good. It's slightly above average, and it suggests a fairly tight group of players for England. The other category is how many players are under consideration. So this is definite, likely, and possible. And it doesn't really indicate much in itself, but it does tell us how many players they have to cut. So basically, they're allowed to bring 26 players to the Cup. That may return to 23 in future tournaments, but I suspect it won't. Anyway, 26 players for this Cup. And unlike the Euro Cup, where they could only bring 26 players, but only put 23 players on the bench. In this case, they're allowed to put all 15 players on the bench. And total players under consideration is 35. So that basically means they'll have to cut 9 of the players that we talked about today. And if we look at the definite and likely categories and use that as a guide, it would mean that they can basically add 5 of the possible players that we talked about here. So it's going to be a difficult decision. Now, they will put out a preliminary squad of 55 players, and they have to use that roster if they want to replace any injured players shortly before the Cup. like that. So we'll also kind of see the top 55 candidates, which will probably include some new players since we only have 45 under consideration here. But in terms of the final selection, Gareth Southgate has a few disappointed souls to deal with because he's basically got to cut 9 of the players that we saw in the possible, probably in the possible category here, but perhaps some of the definite or likely will surprisingly not make it to the cup. Okay, a couple of other stats in terms of average age. England's, so this is also just among the definite, possible, and likely players. The average age is 25.7, and not much to remark on there. It's on the young side. The average is somewhere between 25 and 27, and the average is 26.3. So they have a slightly younger squad. And when I looked at the actual breakdown of that, we see that they have just 4 players who are over 30 and none who are over 32. So Kyle Walker and Jordan Henderson are 32. Kieran Trippier is 31 and Nick Pope is 30. That's pretty young. I mean, that's not that many senior players. For some teams, that could indicate that they maybe need more veterans on the team, but that doesn't seem to be the case for England. And then at the other end of the scale, we'd have just one player who's under 20 years old. That is Jude Bellingham, but we do have 6 players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players who are 22 years old or younger. So that kind of accounts for them being slightly younger than most teams, but it's not really significant. In terms of average cap per player, they have 23.9, so about 24 caps per player. And let me see what the average is there. It's a bit below average, as most teams have 26, or the average right now is 26.2 among the teams I've done so far. So again, not really a significant difference there, but it does suggest a bit of a younger squad. I'll give you a moment to think about who you think has the most caps on the team. And now I shall answer. It is Raheem Sterling with 77 caps. Maybe people would have chosen Harry Kane. He's second with 73. Henderson 69, Kyle Walker 68, and other players have less than 60. And among players who have less than 10 caps, we have 10 players who have less than 10 caps. So 10 of the 35 in that category. So again, slightly less experience than other squads, but not to a worrying degree, as they have plenty of players with experience. In terms of goals, the team total is 113 among the players that are under consideration, and that works out to 3.3 per player. I'm still trying to understand and improve this stat because I'm not sure how much it really means, but so far to me it kind of means that they score more than average, because the average total for teams is 104, and then the average goals per player is 3.4, so they're slightly below that. You can make of it what you will. But generally, it suggests they're a scoring team. Now, for England, they are a scoring team, much more in qualifying than in the Cups. Sometimes they're quite defensive in the Cups, but if they play a weaker team or have a good game, they can certainly score a lot of goals. But I would suggest most of their goal scoring is. What I mean is they tend to be a more scoring team in qualifying than they are in the Cup. And that's because they're more expansive and open in qualifying, whereas when a Cup comes, they sometimes get a bit defensive. Okay, we'll move on to players and issues to watch. So Starting with the defense, Pickford, is he going to be the starter? His form is not as good as before, but he kind of has held on to a place. But Ramsdale started the last 2 games, and Nick Pope's form has become very good, so he might make a comeback onto the team. And I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if they did try another goalkeeper during the Cup. My guess is that Pickford will start, and if he does well, he'll continue, but if he doesn't do well, he may be replaced by, I think it's going to be Ramsdale or Pope, but we'll come to that. The next issue in defence is at the right back position. Do they go with a kind of a more defensive right back like Kyle Walker, or a more offensive right back like Trent Alexander-Arnold? And we said during the long podcast that he seems to prefer the more defensive Kyle Walker. However, he may have found a good balance in Reece James, who has come into the team more. So it'll be interesting to see what they do over on the right side. On the left side, it'll just be interesting to see who they pick. So the players they've been going with, Luke Shaw basically had the position, but now seems to be losing it. Ben Chilwell, and then right winger Kieran Trippier, both making a bid for it. But it seems to be in a bit of flux right now as to who will actually be in that position. In the midfield, that's where they're going to have to cut some players. There's no real issues, and the defensive midfielders are pretty stable with Declan Rice and Kevin Phillips, but in the more attacking midfielders, it seems like that's where they're going to have to cut some of the players. In the attack, a definite issue would be, is there an over-reliance on Kane? I suppose it won't come to a head unless Kane gets injured. But the problem with Kane starting so many of the games is that they haven't really given much field time to whoever's going to back Kane up. And there doesn't seem to be a really strong candidate right now. So that's the other issue in attack, is are there really suitable candidates to back Kane up, or to come in as substitutes, or to come in as a second forward? We saw that they've only ever had one centre forward, and that may be because there aren't a lot of candidates. So they have a few candidates who they've kind of tried and dismissed. So like Ollie Watkins, Patrick Bamford, Callum Wilson, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, have all kind of come and gone, maybe not completely gone. Marcus Rashford too. And I think there is a chance for Marcus Rashford to come back onto the team. I even think a couple of unused players like Ivan Toney could be selected. Mikel Antonio used to be a possible candidate, but now he's committed to Jamaica. He's played World Cup qualifying games for them, so he is cap tied. But Ivan Toney has also been approached by Jamaica, and he refused, hoping to get onto the England team. And given his form recently and the lack of candidates in this position, I think he might appear in the September games. In fact, one of my sources did say he made an appearance in the National League games in June, but I couldn't verify that by more than one source. So anyway, he kind of is a consideration, even though he hasn't been mentioned in this podcast. All right, let's take a look at some of the new players for England. So we have in central defence a couple of new and younger players. Mark Guihi, we won't do the bio on them because that is in the longer version of the podcast, but he is 22 years old and plays for Crystal Palace. Fikayo Tomori is doing well over in Italy. He's not so young, he's 25 years old and has been on the team since 2019, but really has come into the picture fairly recently. Midfielders, we have Conor Gallagher, who is 22 years old and has played 4 games. He's with Chelsea in England. Jared Bowen also has 4 caps. He's not young, actually. He's 26 years old, but he's pretty new to the team and had a good season with West Ham. I think it'll be form that will dictate who's chosen, and we might get an outside player like Ivan Toney coming in. Emile Smith-Rowe is an attacking midfielder, new to the squad, but actually didn't play in the last 4 games, so he'll be in a bit tough to make the team. And Oliver Watkins, or Ollie Watkins, fairly new to the team, but has 7 caps and 2 goals, although he is not a young player either, 26 years old, but fairly new to the English setup. Moving on to injuries, we don't really have any to speak of. We have a couple of players coming back from injury. Chilwell, I think. I have it in my mind that Kyle Walker is another player coming back from injury, but he wasn't injured for any of the games as far as I recall. But anyway, nevertheless, they're both back. Same with John Stones, who seemed a bit absent in my mind, but perhaps just because he hasn't been selected to play for Man City. But kind of coming back into the picture. Notable absences, well, we don't really have any veterans for England who have retired in over the last couple of cups. I would say the closest thing to a notable absence here is Marcus Rashford, who was, fairly firmly established on the team, but hasn't played since the Euro Cup in 2020. And Danny Welbeck actually was a great servant for England from 2011 to 2018, but wasn't selected after September 2018, but still active as a club player and playing well for Brighton. And given the lack of forwards, I think there's an outside chance for both of these 2 players. All right, well, we're going to finish with the going through the squad and predict the starters. So my prediction is that Gareth Southgate will be there. I'm going to put him as a definite candidate. Jordan Pickford, I am not so sure about, but I guess I'll put him as the starter because he has the starting position and would be kind of insulted to lose it. But I think there is a bit of competition there, and I think he could lose it easily if he doesn't perform well. But we'll pick this up in September in the update podcast and maybe have a bit more clarity on it. It looks like Nick Pope and Ramsdale will be the backup keepers here. Again, we'll cover any surprises between then and our update podcast. Harry Maguire is actually losing a bit of form, and I think he's played as a starter for England a bit less. And the same might be said of Conor Cody, actually. I don't think the form is really that great. I think Maguire will make the squad, and Stones will make the squad, but I'm not really convinced that they'll be starters. However, I think it's the most stable backline. I wouldn't be surprised if they start the early games, but especially players who come in good form could kind of quickly replace them. And Conor Cody likely to make the cut, but I think his form will be important over the next while. I'm kind of shining a bit on Fikayo Tomori here as maybe a bit of a surprise starter. Okay, left back, as we said, is a very difficult position, and really, I wonder if Kieran Trippier. I'm just going to copy his name up here. I wonder if Kieran Trippier, who we have as a likely candidate, is going to be the player to do it here, because he's playing that position for his club team, and sometimes plays that position for England. But I'm not confident enough to say that any of them will be a starter. So, well, I think Trippier will be a starter somewhere on the field, not necessarily as the left back. But I won't put him as a starter here. I'll put him as a starter below here. Luke Shaw and Ben Chilwell. I would give the nod to Ben Chilwell right now, but I really can't say. It might be a right midfielder moving over, which they have sometimes done. Right midfielder, my feeling is that Reece James is going to be a starter, not necessarily as the right back, but perhaps as a right midfielder or even as a left back. But I also think Kyle Walker is going to be a starter as well, because Gareth Southgate seems to like him, and he seems to value his defensiveness over Trent Alexander's kind of offensive abilities. He doesn't seem to favour Trent Alexander-Arnold in that position, has actually not used him in that position, but more as a midfielder. Defensive midfielders, Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. Well, I think Declan Rice is definitely a starter. I think Calvin Phillips is likely a starter, but I'm not confident enough to say that right now. But I think he will be selected for sure, and kind of a 50-50, depending maybe on the setup that they use. Central midfielders, we have Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden, but I wouldn't see either of those as starters. And I have to go down the list quite a while to find a starter here. But the next one I see is Raheem Sterling, one of their stars, one of their biggest stars, who will for sure be a starter. But I can't say the same of Jack Grealish in terms of my confidence in him as a starter. Right winger Bukayo Saka. Well, we saw that Phil Foden started as the right winger in the cup, but Gareth Southgate seemed to prefer Saka, and I think he's going to be a starter. But I wouldn't be surprised if Phil Foden starts instead. But there we have it. Mason Mount, his form has not been good recently, but I think for England he's a starting player. Again, maybe switching positions based on the formation they use. And the only forward who we define as a starter is Harry Kane. So yeah, I didn't really talk about substitutes here, and I'm going to skip that because it would be a bit of a long discussion. But I would say, basically the players who are listed as likely here will either be starters or substitutes, and then really just a handful. We saw that there's only room for a handful of the possible candidates to make it in. All right, well, that brings us to the end, and thank you for listening. Keep in mind that we're going to be doing an update as soon as new information comes out, and that'll probably be in early November, maybe early to mid-November. I'd like to do it not when the teams publish the preliminary roster, but when the final roster is decided upon. So keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, which is soccerphilescaptivate.fm. But you can find us other ways by typing Soccerphiles into Google or Soccerphiles Canada, or the show notes, which I've been working on increasingly, have links to lots of good stuff, including timestamps and other podcasts that are related to this one. So thanks for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.